So, hello and welcome back. We are back yet again with Mr. Jules Verne as we journey to the center of the earth. And I keep saying it, but I have been enjoying this romp through the maybe not earliest sci-fi, but one of the early sci-fis, and I've really been having a good time. And I was thinking about it this morning and I was like, I thought maybe I had read this book, but now thinking about it, maybe I read the other big Jules Verne book that got assigned a lot. I might have read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I don't know because it's been so long and you would think that I would remember this, but maybe I only read it once and it just flitted in and out of my mind. So all that to say, this kind of feels like the first time, which makes it even more fun. So, anyway, we're going to jump back in. We're going to read two more chapters of Journey to the Center of the Earth, where our protagonists, Axel and his uncle, Professor Lindenbrandt. Ugh, it's really good when I can't remember people's names. But yeah, Axel and the professor are going to begin their voyage to hopefully go to the center of the earth. They were a little bit stymied by the fact that they're going to have to get a local guide and go overland because for some reason no one in the little town that lives on an island right on the edge of the ocean, supposedly nobody has a boat. I'm not buying that, but hey, it makes a good plot device. So let's jump back in and see what is coming next, beginning with chapter 11. In the evening, I took a short walk along the shore and returned early to lie down on my bed made of big boards where I slept deeply. When I awoke, I heard my uncle talking at a great rate in the next room, and I immediately got up and hurried to join him. He was conversing in Danish with a tall man of robust build. This large fellow had to have great strength. His eyes, set in a crude and rather naive face, seemed intelligent to me. They were a dreamy blue. Long hair, which would have been considered red even in England, fell on his athletic shoulders. The movements of this native were smooth, but he made little use of his arms when he speaks, like a man who knew nothing or cared about the language of gestures. His entire appearance bespoke perfect calm, not indolence, but tranquility. One could tell that he would be beholden to no one, that he worked at his own convenience, and that nothing in this entire world could astonish or disturb his philosophy. I became aware of the nuances of this character by the way in which he listened to his interlocutor's impassioned flow of words. He remained with his arms crossed, immobile in the face of my uncle's multiple gesticulations. For a negative, his head turned from left to right. It nodded for an affirmative, ever so slightly that his hair scarcely even moved. This was economy of motion carried to a point of avarice. Certainly, in looking at the man, I would never have guessed that he was a hunter. He did not look likely to frighten his game for sure, but how could he reach it? Everything became clear when Mr. Frederickson informed me that this calm individual was only a hunter of the eider duck, whose inner plumage constitutes the greatest wealth of the island. This is, in fact, what is called eider down, and gathering it requires no great energy of movement. In the first days of the summer, the female, a kind of pretty duck, goes to build her nest among the rocks of the fjords that lie all along the coast. After building her nest, she feathers it with down plucked from her breast, and immediately the hunter, or rather the trader, comes along, robs the nests, and the female starts her work all over again. This goes on as long as she has any down left. When she has stripped herself bare, the male takes his turn to pluck himself, but as the hard and coarse plumage of the male has no commercial value, the hunter does not take the trouble to steal the bedding for his brood, and so the nest is completed. The female lays her eggs, the young are hatched, and the next year the down harvest begins again. Now, since the eider duck does not choose steep cliffs for her nest, but rather the easy horizontal rocks that slope to the sea, the Icelandic hunter could exercise his calling without any great exertion. He was a farmer who did not have to either sow or reap his harvest, just gather it in. This grave, phlegmatic, and silent individual was called Hans Bajecki. He came recommended by Mr. Friedrichsen, and he was our future guide. His manner contrasted strikingly with my uncle. Nonetheless, they easily came to terms with each other. Neither one debated the amount of the payment. The one was ready to accept anything that was offered, and the other was ready to give whatever was demanded, and never was a bargain made more easily. The outcome of the negotiations was that Hans committed himself to lead us to the village of Stapi, on the southern shore of the Snaffles Peninsula at the very foot of the volcano. By land, this would be about 22 miles, a journey of about 2 days, according to my uncle's opinion. But when he found out that a Danish mile was 24,000 feet long, he was forced to modify his calculations, and given the poor conditions of the road, to allow 7 or 8 days for the march. 4 horses were to be placed at his disposal, 2 to carry him and me, and 2 for the luggage. Hans would walk, as was his custom. He knew that part of the coast perfectly, and he promised to take us the shortest way. His contract was not to terminate with our arrival at Stapi. He would continue in my uncle's service for the whole period of his scientific excursions for the price of 3 riksdaler a week. But it was explicitly agreed that this sum would be paid to the guide every Saturday evening, a sine qua non condition of his contract. The expedition was set for June 16th. My uncle wanted to pay the hunter a portion in advance, but the latter refused with one word. "Efter," he said. "After?" said the professor for my edification. And the negotiations concluded, and Hans promptly withdrew. "An excellent man," said my uncle, "but he doesn't know the marvelous role that the future has in store for him." "So he goes with us as far as—" "Yes, Axel, as far as the center of the earth." 48 hours were now left until our departure. To my great regret, I had to use those hours for preparation. All of our intelligence was devoted to pack every item in the most convenient way. Instruments on one side, weapons on the other, tools in this package, food in that one, 4 sets of packages in all. The instruments that we took included an Agel centigrade thermometer, graduated up to 150 degrees, which seemed to me either too much or too little. Too much if the surrounding heat was to rise so high, in which case we would be cooked alive, and too little to measure the temperature of springs or anything else that we found that was melted. A manometer with compressed air, designed to indicate pressures above that of the atmosphere at sea level. Indeed. And Ordinary barometer would not have served our purpose, as the pressure would increase proportionally with our descent below the Earth's surface. A chronometer, made by Boissanus June of Geneva, accurately set to the median of Hamburg, and two compasses to measure both inclination and declination, also a night glass, and two Ruhmkorff devices, by which of an electric current supplied a highly portable, reliable, and unencumbering source of light. The weapons that we took consisted of two Purdley and Moore Company rifles and two Colt revolvers. Why weapons, you might ask? We had neither savages or wild beasts to fear, I suppose, but my uncle seemed to rely on his arsenal as on his instruments, above all, in a considerable quantity of gun cotton, since that is unaffected by moisture and whose explosive force far exceeds that of regular gunpowder. The tools that we took included two ice picks, two pickaxes, a silk rope ladder, three iron-tipped walking sticks, an axe, a hammer, a dozen wedges and iron spikes, and many long knotted ropes. Inevitably, this made for a large load, mostly because the ladder was 300 feet long. Finally, there were the food supplies. This parcel was not large, but comforting, for I knew that it contained 6 months' worth of dried meat and dried biscuits. Gin was the only liquid, and there was no water at all, but we had flasks, and my uncle counted on springs from which to fill them. Whatever objections I had raised as to their quality, temperature, and even their possible absence had remained entirely ineffective. To complete the exact inventory of all of our travel supplies, I should mention a portable medical kit containing blunt scissors, splints for broken limbs, a piece of unbleached linen tape, bandages, compresses, band-aids, a bowl for bleeding, all frightful things. And then there was a range of phials containing dextrin, pure alcohol, liquid acetate of lead, ether, vinegar, and ammonia. All drugs whose purpose was not reassuring. And finally, all the articles necessary for the Ruhmkorff device. My uncle made sure not to leave out a supply of tobacco, hunting powder, and tinder, nor a leather belt he wore around his waist where he contained a sufficient quantity of gold, silver, and paper money. 6 pairs of good shoes, made waterproof with a layer of tar and rubber, were also packed with the tools. Clothed, shod, and equipped like this, there's no telling how far we may go, he said to me. The 14th was entirely spent in arranging all of our different items. In the evening, we dined at the Verne-Chapters in the company of the mayor and Dr. Hayleton, the great doctor of the country. Mr. Frederickson was not with us. I learned afterwards that he and the governor disagreed on some administrative issue, and neither of them spoke to the other. I therefore couldn't understand a single word of what was said during this semi-official dinner. I just noticed that my uncle talked the entire time. On the 15th, our preparations were complete. Our host gave the professor very great pleasure by providing him with immeasurably a more perfect map of Iceland than Henderson's had. The map of Mr. Olaf Nicholson Olsen on a scale of 1 to 480,000 and published by the Icelandic Literary Society on the basis of Mr. Fridrik Schiele's geodesic works and Bjorn Gumlaguson's topographical survey. This was a very precious document for a mineralogist. Our final evening was spent in intimate conversation with Mr. Frederickson, with whom I felt the most lively sympathy. The conversation was followed by a rather restless sleep, at least on my part. At 5 in the morning, the neighing of 4 horses pawing under my window woke me up, and I got dressed quickly and went down to the street. Hans was finishing loading our luggage, as it were, without even moving a limb, it seemed. Yet he executed this work with uncommon skill. My uncle was generating more noise than effort, and our guide seemed to pay almost no attention to my uncle's instructions. Everything was ready by 6 o'clock. Mr. Frederickson shook hands with us. My uncle thanked him in Icelandic for his hospitality with much heartfelt sentiment. As for me, I sketched a cordial greeting in my best Latin. Then we got into the saddle, and with his last farewell, Mr. Frederickson treated me to a line of Virgil that seemed to be made for us travelers on an uncertain route. Et quamque viam dendent fortuna sequamer. And that is where the chapter ends. There is a footnote at the bottom of this that the translation to that butchered Latin that I just read is, "And whenever fortune opens up a path, we will follow." That's kind of poetic. I'm going to get a drink, and then we're going to finish up with one more chapter. All right. Now it is time to read Chapter 12 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. We had started under an overcast but calm sky. There was no fear of heat, none of disastrous rain. It was perfect weather for tourists. The pleasure of riding on horseback through an unknown country made me easy to please at the start of our venture. I gave myself wholly to the pleasure of the traveler, made up of desires and freedom. I was beginning to take a share in the enterprise. Besides, I said to myself, where's the risk? Traveling in a very interesting country, scaling a very remarkable mountain. At worst, scrambling down into an extinct crater. It's obvious that Sakmussen did nothing more than that. As for a passage leading to the center of the earth, pure fantasy, perfectly impossible, so we might as well get all the benefit we can out of this expedition without haggling about it. I had scarcely finished this reasoning when we left the town behind. Hans moved on steadily, keeping ahead of us at an even, smooth, rapid pace. The 2 pack horses followed him without needing any directions. Then came my uncle and myself, looking not too bad on our small, hardy animals. Iceland is one of the largest islands in Europe. Its surface is 14,000 square miles, and it only has 60,000 inhabitants. Geographers have divided it into 4 quarters, and we were traveling almost diagonally across the southwest quarter, called the Sydvesturfjordur. On leaving the town, Hans took us along the seashore. We crossed lean pastures, trying very hard to look green. They succeeded better at yellow. The rugged peaks of the rocks blurred in the mists on the eastern horizon. At times, a few patches of snow, attracting the vague light, littered the slopes of the distant mountains. Certain peaks, rising up boldly, pierced the clouds and reappeared above the moving mists, looking like reefs emerging through the sky. Often, these chains of barren rocks reached all the way to the sea and encroached on the pasture, but there was always enough room to pass. Besides, our horses instinctively chose the proper places without ever slowing their pace. My uncle did not even have the satisfaction of stirring his beast with voice or whip. He had no reason to be impatient. I could not help but smiling to see so tall a man on such a small horse, and as his legs nearly touched the ground, he kind of looked like a six-legged centaur. Good animal, he kept saying. And also, you'll see, Axel, there is no more intelligent an animal than the Icelandic horse. Snow, storm, impassable roads, rocks, glaciers, nothing stops it. It's courageous, somber, and reliable. Never a false step, never an adverse reaction. If there is a river or a fjord to cross, and we'll encounter them, you'll see it plunge in at once, as if it were an amphibian, and reach the opposite bank. But let's not interfere with it. Let's let it have its way, and we'll cover 10 miles a day, one carrying the other. Undoubtedly we might, I said, but what about our guide? Oh, never mind him. People like him walk without being aware of it. This one moves so rarely he'll never get tired. Besides, if necessary, I'll let him have my horse. I'll soon get cramped up if I don't move a little. My arms are all right, but I have to think about my legs. We advanced at a rapid pace. The country was already almost a desert. Here and there an isolated farm, a solitary bower made of wood, mud, or bits of lava appeared like a poor beggar by the wayside. These rundown huts seemed to solicit charity from passers-by, and one was almost tempted to give them alms. In this country, there were not even roads or paths, and the vegetation, however slow, quickly disappeared, and the rare traveler's footsteps were on rock. Yet, this part of the province, at a short distance from the capital, is considered to be among the inhabited and cultivated parts of Iceland. What then must the other areas look like? More desolate than this desert. In the first half mile, we had not yet seen even one farmer standing at his cabin door, nor one shepherd tending to a flock less wild than himself. We had seen nothing but a few cows and sheep that were left to themselves. What would the regions look like that were convulsed, turned upside down by erupted phenomena, sprung from volcanic explosions and subterranean movements? We would get to know them before long, but when I looked at the map, I saw that we avoided them by following the sinuous edge of the shoreline. Indeed, the great underground movement is confined to the central portion of the island. There, horizontal layers of superimposed rocks, called trops in Scandinavian, trachytic strips, eruptions of basalt, tuff, and all of the volcanic mixtures, steams of lava and molten bits, created a land of supernatural terrors. I had no idea yet of the spectacle which was awaiting us on the Snæfell's Peninsula, where these residents of a fiery nature create a terrible chaos. 2 hours after leaving the town, we arrived at the town of Gafuns, called Eilkirkja, or Principal Church. There was nothing remarkable here, just a few houses, scarcely enough for even a hamlet in Germany. Hans stopped here for half an hour. He shared our frugal breakfast and answered my uncle's questions about the road with yes or no. And when he was asked where he planned for us to spend the night, he only said, Gardar. I checked the map to see where Gardar was. I saw a small town of that name on the banks of the fjord, 4 miles away from the town we had started at. Only 4 miles, he said. 4 miles out of 22. Now that's a pretty stroll. He was about to say something to the guide, who, without answering, resumed his place in front of the horses and began to walk. 3 hours later, still treading on the discolored grass of the pastures, We had to work around Kollafjord, an easier and shorter route than going across it. We soon entered into a ping store, or communal gathering place called Ageborg, from whose steeple 12 o'clock would have struck if Icelandic churches were rich enough to have clocks. But they're like the parishioners, who have no watches and so do without. When we got there, our horses were fed, and then they took a narrow path beaten between a chain of hills and the sea, and carried us directly to the old Kirkja of Barantar, and 1 mile farther on to the Sabor Annexia, a church annex on the southern shore of the fjord. It was now 4 o'clock, and we had only made 4 miles. In that place, the fjord was at least a half a mile wide. The waves broke noisily on the pointed rocks. This bay opened out between walls of rock, a sort of sharp-edged precipice about 3,000 feet high, and remarkable for the brown layers which separated the beds of the reddish tuff. Whatever the intelligence of our horses might be, I didn't want to put it to the test by crossing an actual estuary on the back of a quadruped. If they're intelligent, I thought, they won't try to cross. And no matter what, I'll be intelligent in their stead. But my uncle didn't want to wait. He spurred his horse into the shore. His mount sniffed at the waves and then stopped. My uncle, who had an instinct of his own, applied more pressure. Renewed refusal by the animal, which shook its head. Then there was cussing and a lashing of the whip, but kicks from the animal, who began to throw his rider. At last, the little horse, bending his knees, crawled out from underneath the professor's legs and just left him standing on 2 boulders on the shore, looking like the Colossus of Rhodes. "Damned brute," said my uncle. The horseman suddenly turned pedestrian. He was as ashamed as a cavalry officer demoted to foot soldier. "Tharja," said the guide, touching his shoulder. "What? A boat?" "Der," said Hans, pointing to the boat. "Huh! It is a boat!" I exclaimed. "Well, why didn't you say so? Let's go." "Tidevatten," said the guide. "What's he saying?" I asked. "He says tide," said my uncle, translating the Danish word. "So we have to wait for the tide?" "For Dida?" said my uncle. "Ja," said Hans. My uncle stomped his foot while the horses walked towards the boat. I perfectly understood the necessity to wait for a perfect moment of the tide to undertake the crossing of the fjord, when the sea reached its greatest height and there is no current. Then the ebb and flow have no perceptible effect, and the boat does not risk being carried to the bottom or all the way out to sea. This favorable moment arrived at 6 o'clock. My uncle, myself, our guide, 2 ferrymen, and the 4 horses had embarked on a somewhat fragile seeming raft. Used to, as I was, the steamships on the Elbe, I found the oars of the rowers rather a dismal mechanical device. It took us more than an hour to cross the fjord, but thankfully that concluded without any mishap, and a half an hour later we reached the Alkirkja of Gardar. And that is the end of the chapter. You know, I think I am doomed in life to constantly be reading books with words that probably would not be hard to pronounce if I spoke more languages. Also, I really have to feel so bad for the Icelandic horse. We have another woodcut of the professor on his little Icelandic horse who is stepping out from underneath the professor's legs because the professor is very, very tall. Actually, hang on one second. Okay, thankfully I had this on my bookshelf near me. But the Icelandic horses that they're riding are really fascinating. There's a picture of an actual Icelandic horse. And they're really cool because they're the size of ponies, but they're actually considered horses. And they sometimes even eat fish, which is just absolutely insane to think about. It's because they were raised in a place that really doesn't have the industry, I guess, for big horse breeds. And it's really cool. Like they are they're very unique looking. They're very tough horses. And I was reading in here. I haven't read through this book in a long time, but they're well known for being very hardy and very intelligent. So I liked the fact that in this book it talks about the fact that, not only can they carry all of this gear that our intrepid heroes need to journey to the center of the earth over very inhospitable terrain, but they're also smart enough not to go swimming across a fjord and just to get rid of their rider by slithering out from underneath his legs. Also, I don't know about any of you, but the list of items that they are taking to the center of the earth seems woefully inadequate to me. It sounds like they took more weaponry than anything else, and only one package of food and no water at all. I don't think that's going to work out well. Hopefully, there will be good hunting there in the center of the earth, which I'm sure is well populated, but we're going to have to wait to see what Jules Verne populates the center of the earth with. So that is where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile, and I will see you tomorrow.